Rise and shine!
It's espresso time!
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and successful people don't wake up and go, "Wow, it's another day, I'm so happy!" The difference is they have a morning routine that sets them up for success, like watching one of these videos. So let's start your day off right together. Grab your coffee and get ready for a shot of espresso from Jordan Peterson.
I wake up every morning.
Espresso keep me going.
I wake up every morning.
One of the fundamental theses of 12 Rules for Life and also of Maps of Meaning is that because life is essentially tragic in its fundamental essence, you need a sustaining meaning that's deep and profound, and deep and profound enough to get you through bad times, because there will be very bad times in your life. There'll be death, and there'll be illness, and there'll be disappointment of all sorts. And there'll be just the standard difficulties of life in the world to contend with. And you really must have something that's profound and powerful to set up against that. And I think that your voluntary adoption of the struggle to improve being is the proper antidote to that, and that the best way to do that is to live responsibly and truthfully. I truly believe that.
Finding your purpose is easy. Finding your purpose, finding your passion, finding what you're meant to do is easy. And I will beat this drum until everybody figures it out, because it's one of the most common questions that I keep getting asked over and over and over and over and over and over again. We're not taught this in school. The people that we're learning from are not people who are living their purpose either. Your purpose, it comes from your pain. Your purpose comes from your pain. That's a simple answer. Whatever you struggled with, whenever you felt the lowest as a human, whenever you felt the most worthless, the most like you didn't belong, that moment, that's your purpose, to help other people who are currently going through that. For optimistic, happy, ambitious people, we usually don't like looking backwards into the pain, right? Like if you're the kind of person watching these videos, you're probably the kind of person who's pouring into others, who's loving others, who's optimistic, who's trying to not think about the rain that's happening today, right? Not focusing on the rain, but focusing on the opportunities and the sunshine to come, right? That's probably you. Okay, so the point is not to sit in the previous pain. The point is to use that as leverage for yourself to jump into the next level of life for you. A more meaningful, a more purposeful, a more intentional life. Whatever you struggled with the most, there are millions of people right now who are struggling with the same thing. They're struggling with the exact same thing as you did. And they need your help. They need your guidance, they need your wisdom, they need your story, they need your hope, they need your light, they need your love, they need your energy, they need you to show up. That's your purpose. And that will never get old. That will never get old. That will never get old. Every time you see somebody who is a younger version of you, and you can have a conversation with them, and you can see the hope light up in their eyes, that now they feel like something is possible because they met you, that's a feeling that will never get old. I'll be, 200 years old, sitting in an old age home, still trying to help people believe themselves more, because that's what I struggled with the most. I am still making content. I am still speaking and writing books and creating videos and doing podcasts and shows, and everything I do is because I'm trying to help 19-year-old Evan. 19-year-old Evan who turned down his dream job to start a business, to make $300 a month, to have no self-belief, to feel like I made the biggest decision, the worst decision of my life. Felt like I made the worst decision of my life. Instead of taking that dream job to do this business, it was hooray, euphoria for a couple weeks, and then realized, oh my gosh, this is a lot harder than I thought, and I'm not making any money. Did I make a big mistake? All my friends were making tons of money at those investment banking jobs that I could have had, and I felt lost, and I felt hopeless, and I felt like I made a big mistake. And I was working like crazy, and I was too embarrassed and too ashamed to ask people for help. to let people in, and I didn't believe in myself at all. That's who I love helping. I love helping humans. You know, I want to help humans believe in themselves, but the softest spot in my heart is for entrepreneurs who are trying to get their thing off the ground, because I remember how hard it was for me to get my thing off the ground. And I quit. There was one day that I actually quit on my business partner. And thankfully I went back the next day. You know, thankfully I didn't fully quit all the way, because I would have regret that. And I think a lot of people do. You end up quitting too soon on your dreams. And so that's who I'm trying to help. With all my content, with all my work, with everything I do, with 12,000 plus videos later, I'm still doing it. People ask me, how do you stay so consistent? How have you made videos for 12 years and have not burnt out? Well, because I love what I'm doing, because I feel like it matters. I don't love the idea of just sitting here in the parking lot of a Costco making a video, but I love the idea that this is talking to you, that, hello, I'm a part of your routine. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. And so you can have that too. You know, whatever you struggled with, there are millions of people who are struggling with that right now. And they don't know who to go to. They won't listen to Evan Carmichael because I haven't struggled with the thing that you struggled with. But they'll listen to you because you've been through it. The next part becomes, well, who am I? Who am I to have this mission? Who am I to help these people? I'm still trying to figure it out myself. Do you resonate with that? It's like, who am I to be this person to help people? I still don't have all the answers myself. And imposter syndrome starts to creep in, right? You ever felt that? There's so many better people out there than you, and you're an imposter for even trying. So the way to combat imposter syndrome is two ways, and leverage both. I've leveraged both and still leverage both, because I still feel at times that I'm not good enough and there are better people than me. And so here's the two things that I use. Number one, you see your growth as a staircase. Your growth is a staircase. And you want to climb forever. You don't want to ever stop growing. You don't want to ever stop learning. As soon as you feel like you've stopped learning and stopped growing, you start to really hate your life. You always want to feel like you're growing and learning somewhere. So look at your growth as a staircase. And when you're doing imposter syndrome, what you're doing is looking at the people who are ahead of you on the staircase and saying, oh my gosh, look at that person. They're so much further ahead of me. I suck. Why can't I be like them? Why can't I be like Elon Musk or Oprah Winfrey or Tony Robbins or whoever your heroes are that you look up to and respect and feel like they're so far ahead of you? And because you're not where they are means in your own head, you can't do anything. You can't share your message. You're not worthy enough, right? Well, what you need to recognize is you're still on your staircase as well, but you're not at step zero. If Oprah and Elon Musk are at step 8,000, maybe you're at step 100. Great. But you're not at step zero. You've come a long way. You look back. Instead of only looking forward to see everything that you haven't done yet, look back to see where you've come from. Like, oh my gosh, you know what? I'm at step 100. It's nowhere close to where I want to be. I haven't figured it all out, but I've learned so much more compared to who I used to be. Then understand that most people who are struggling with the thing that you struggled with, they're still at step 0. And you're at step 100. You can help them. You can't help them get to 8,000 level, but you can help them get to step 100 because that's where you're at. Most of the people who are struggling right now are at step 0. And they need a little bit of help, and they need someone to believe in them enough to help carry them to step 1 and step 2 and step 3. It's your job to give them that hope and to give them that momentum. And you can. And the way I like to think about it is every time I take another step up on my journey, you reach back and you help somebody else out who's behind you. Help other people climb on and rise on their journey, because learning alone isn't enough. We want to feel like what we do matters. We want to feel like we're having an impact. That's where purpose comes from. We all want to wake up every day and feel like the work that we do is going to matter to somebody. You want to feel like today's important. I want to feel like today's important. What I tell myself, at least, is that people are going to watch this video and somebody's going to get inspired enough to take some kind of action. For somebody watching this video will be the one that actually pushes you over the edge into action mode. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I hope. It's what I tell myself. And that's how I get the meaning behind doing the work, because I'm just sitting in my car in a Costco parking lot with my dog here, making a video, talking to my phone. But we want to feel like what we do matters. So every time you take a step up on that staircase, it's great to have people who are ahead of us that we learn from and look up to. But every time we take a step up, we pull somebody else up with us. And most people who are struggling are still way, way, way behind you. So you don't have to have all the answers, but you have enough answers to help the people who are at the start. So that's one. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome, we found our purpose. It's to help people who are currently who we used to be, what we used to struggle with. We're trying to figure out imposter syndrome. Step number 1 is a staircase of growth. Step number 2 is imagining you sitting with yourself from 10 years ago. Think about who you used to be 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Like, you've grown a lot. If you're watching this channel, you're subscribed here, you're into personal development, you don't want to stay stuck. You have grown a lot. You have. If not from my content, from other videos, from other books, from other podcasts, you've grown a lot. Like, hey, high five, congrats, that's amazing. So imagine you're going to sit down on the park bench with the you from 5 or 10 years ago. And you've got 5 minutes with that person. You got 5 minutes with former you. Do you think you could share something with them that might inspire them? Do you think you could share something with them that might give them hope or some momentum or a little bit of motivation? Think about what message you might share. And when I've done this with live audiences, they'll say things like, it's going to work out. You're going to be okay. Believe in yourself. You'll get through this. You're stronger than you think. As I ask live audiences, these are the things that they say on the microphone or pop in the chat. And everybody, all of these people who at the beginning couldn't find their purpose and struggled with imposter syndrome, now all of a sudden have absolute clarity and certainty with the message they would tell their younger self. Okay, great. So if you are convinced that you can help younger you, just recognize that there are millions of people who are younger you. If you can help the you from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, that's what most of the people are struggling with right now. And that becomes your message. Your purpose comes from your pain. You don't need to spend years on a mountain figuring it out. You don't have to spend journals upon journals upon journals. You don't need to hire an expensive coach to help you through this. Your purpose comes from your pain. Whatever you struggled with is the thing you want to help other people through, period. And it will be with you for the rest of your life. And when you can spend the time to figure that out and then do the exercises to overcome that imposter syndrome that will come as your next step, it unlocks everything. It unlocks gratitude. It unlocks purpose. It unlocks happiness. It unlocks fulfillment. Because what it does is give you this well of energy to then go off and do the scary, difficult things, to finally get out of the way of your mind holding you back, telling you that little voice telling you can't do things, because it's no longer just about you. It's about helping other people. And every time you can shift it from being about you to helping others, it gives you that extra little bit of courage to go off and do the thing. Because you're built to serve, because you want to help, because you got a big mission inside you. And the only difference between where you are now and where you will be in a year is how much momentum and how much belief you create in yourself to make that vision a reality. Now I've got some special bonus clips that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the question of the day. I want to know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week? When you watch a video and just get motivated, the science says you have a 35% chance of actually following through on your goals. That is not good enough, Believe Nation. But when you create a specific plan of action for what you're going to do next and commit to other people, like leaving it in the comments below, that number jumps to 95% chance of you following through. So I want to know your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action. Put it down in the comments below so I can celebrate you. Also, if you want to have more self-confidence and self-belief, the science says it can take up to 254 days of consecutive action for you to shift that habit forward. So I've designed a special free program to help you get more self-belief for every day. For 254 days, I will send you an email to an unlisted video that if you watch it, will shift your confidence forward. The links to join for free are in the description below.
If you're going to speak effectively, you have to know way more than you're talking about. Well, you have to treat yourself like you matter. Because if you don't, then you don't take care of yourself and you become vengeful. Oh no, you're okay. You should feel good about yourself. Like, you're fine the way you are. It's like you think, well, that's a calming message for people. You're going to use what you think to guide your action, and the consequence of that is going to be how your life turns out. So I'm dead serious about what I write because I know what the pathway is. It's like you don't communicate in a false manner, because if you do, you will warp the structure that guides your actions, and you will absolutely 100% suffer for that. I mean, one of the things I've learned as a clinical psychologist is that I've never seen anyone, it's really a terrifying thing, I've never seen anyone get away with anything, ever. The chickens always come home to roost. So, and sometimes it might, let's say you get away with something, it's like, yeah, you think so, man. You wait 5 years from now, 7 years from now, it'll come back.
Is that karma?
It's more like, yes, I think it's the same idea, but it's more like you don't have the power to manipulate reality. Like, you have the power to bring about reality in some sense, because you confront potential, and through your actions and your communicative intent, you turn potential into reality. But you don't have the power to bend reality without it snapping back at you.
You don't think so? So you don't think visionaries and influencers have the ability to bend reality?
No, I don't think they bend it. I think that they I mean, you can bring new things into being, but you can't get away with a falsehood. No, you can definitely bring new things into being.
You can't get away with a falsehood.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, makes sense.
And you can't get away with weak thinking either, because, I mean, any more than you can get away with improper action. It just doesn't work. So you're contending, it's why, I mean, one of the themes in my writing is the danger of falsehood. And at every level, it's like, well, if you tell the truth to the degree that you can, or at least don't lie, I think that's rule 8, then you have reality on your side. You got to decide, man, you want reality on your side, or do you want reality against you? Now, I wouldn't recommend the whole reality against you thing, because you're not going to win. You're going to get flattened. And so I'm very careful with what I say, and I'm very careful with what I write. You need a value hierarchy. It's inevitable that you have a value hierarchy, and that you look at the world through it, and that it should be well structured, and that there should be something of divine importance at the top. I would say what should occupy the top position is the realization, for example, that each person is of divine value, and that the most appropriate way of interacting with potential is by embodying and speaking the truth. That's not a bad way of briefly conceptualizing what might be at the highest pinnacle of the value structure. I would say that's what the logos is. And so the soul is what manifests itself in the choice between different pathways, in the choice between different ways of transforming the potential of the future into the actuality of the present. And it does that by making ethical decisions, by choosing between good and evil at each choice point. And to the degree that it chooses good, then it takes the raw potential of the future and it transforms it into the being of the present that is good. And to the degree that it does that in a manner that's evil and contaminated by malevolence and hatred and vengefulness, then it takes a pathway that corrupts the world and makes things worse. And it's the soul that's doing that, and it's the soul that's responsible for that. And it's also that active part of the soul that's shaping the deeper soul in some sense, which would be something like the cumulative consequence of all those choices, something akin to what people more classically have referred to as character.
I've had clients, many clients in their 30s, who are trying to, this is more true with women, I would say. A lot of women who are very high achieving and who established their career goals at 30, and then want to differentiate out their life. They want to have a husband, they want to have a family, they're trying to figure out how to do that. And one of the things I've noticed that around 30, you really have to stop comparing yourself in some ways to other people. And the reason for that is that the particularities of your life are so idiosyncratic that there isn't anyone really all that much like you, because the details of your life happen to matter. And so maybe you compare yourself to some rock star or something like that, and the person's rich and famous and glamorous and all that, but they're alcoholic and they use too much cocaine and they've had 3 divorces, and it's like, how the hell do you make sense out of that? Is that someone that you should judge yourself harshly against or not? The answer is you don't know, because you don't know all the details of their lives. And who do you know that you can compare yourself to? That's easy. You. Yesterday. So here's a good goal. It's something like, well, aim high. And I really mean that. It's like, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. Aim high, but use as your control yourself. It's like, so your goal is to make today some tiny increment better than yesterday. And you can use better, you can define better yourself. This doesn't have to be some imposition of external morality. You know where you're weak and insufficient, where you could improve. You think, okay, well, this is what I'm like yesterday. If I did this little thing, things would be just an increment better. And, well, that's a great thing, because you get the ball rolling, and incremental improvement is unstoppable. You can actually implement it, and it starts to generate Pareto distribution-like consequences. It starts to compound. And I've seen that happen in people's lives over and over. Well, people write me all the time and tell me that they're doing that, but I've seen that happen in people's lives continually. They make a goal that, the goal should be, how could I conceive of my life so that if I had that life, it would clearly be worth living, so I wouldn't have to be bitter, resentful, deceitful, arrogant, and vengeful.
One of the things I've learned, if you have a dispute with someone and it needs to be settled, and maybe they need to change more than you, and that's not always the case, because sometimes the settling requires change on your part, but let's say that they have to be defeated in some sense in comparison to you. You don't want to defeat them any more than necessary. It's like you don't knock your opponent to the ground and then jump up and down on them 3 or 4 times in triumph. You pin them and then let them up. Minimal necessary force, because any more than that just produces a counter reaction. And so, and I guess the other thing is my motivation when I'm engaged, let's say in these discussions, is that I'm not trying to win the argument. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to say what I think as clearly as I can. And there might be an element, one of the consequences of that might be what appears to be a victory, but the right victory is the victory for your ability to articulate what you believe. And that's what I'm trying to do. And so that's another reason to stay composed, is like, well, okay, this person has just thrown a curveball at me. It's like, all right, so, well, I could be thinking, well, I don't want to be undermined by that, and I don't want to make a fool of myself, and I don't want to be put on the spot. And of course, all of those things are true. But mostly what I'm thinking about is, okay, well, now I've got that question. I want to answer as truthfully as I possibly can. What do I think about what was just said? And I'm not calculating the outcome. I'm assuming this is a mark of faith, right? This is the faith that people have talked about being something that has to be manifested necessarily. We've been talking about this since the dawn of time. What's the faith? The faith is that if you say what you believe to be true, then whatever happens is the best thing that could have happened. And I believe that. So that's what and I really believe it. Partly because I believe that if you're deceitful, which is the opposite of that, or manipulative or malicious or malevolent, but maybe primarily manipulative, then what you're acting out is your belief that deceit will bring victory. And I just don't believe that at all. I think it's a preposterous claim. And so if deceit won't bring victory, then truth is what brings victory, if there is such a thing as truth. And there's certainly such a thing as deceit. So there must be such a thing as truth. And so, and some of it's just curiosity too. It's like, well, I'm going to say what I think and see what happens. And that's an adventure. You know, that's the adventure of your life, really. And you don't want to miss that, because that's what you've got in your life, is for it to be an adventure. It's not an easy road, you know, it's a stormy sea. And what you have is the adventure of contending with God in the waves. That's what you have. And the way you do that is with truth. And then that sort of takes you out of the immediacy of the conflict, whoever it is that, the conflict with whoever it is that you're talking to. You're trying to ally yourself with something that's deeper and more profound and more lasting. You have to negotiate until you come to the best solution that can be negotiated, which isn't necessarily a perfect solution, but it might be the best one that can be done. And then you have to stick with it until the next negotiation. And if you get upset during the negotiations, which you likely will, because these are difficult topics, how to divide up responsibilities in the house, and people get mad because they feel they've been taken advantage of or aren't being listened to. One of the rules was, well, you can leave the discussion, but only until you calm down, and then you have to come back, because these things have to be pushed through. They have to be negotiated through, because the alternative is, well, important things don't get done, or people do them resentfully because they're sort of forced by their own orderliness or their own conscientiousness, or but by force, psychological or otherwise, on the part of other people. These things have to be negotiated through. You can tell if you've got the balance between making peace and speaking the truth right if the conversation continues. And it can be emotional, and will be, and can be difficult, because important things have to be dealt with. But as long as the people are still in the conversation and communicating, then you've got the balance right. And you might have to take a break. Maybe you have to hold off till the next day. Maybe sometimes when you're negotiating something that's difficult, you have to offer the other person the opportunity to sleep on their decision too, which I think is often a very good idea. If you have to make an important decision in your life, it's very useful to tell the person that you're negotiating with that, look, I'm interested in this and it seems good, but I'm not going to agree until I sleep on it. It gives you, well, lots of things happen when you sleep. You organize your brain when you sleep, at least to the degree that you can organize it. And you can often be more solid or more doubtful about a decision if you sleep on it. Head down endurance. And that'll get you through bad times, that endurance. It's such an underrepresented virtue, that ability to trudge forward unhappily under a unfairly burdensome load is a testament to character, if you can. And it's something that should be encouraged and valued. So, and I'm not making the claim that people who are depressed, who can't get out of bed, lack endurance. Some do and some don't, because depression comes in very varied degrees of intensity, and you can be laid out completely by depression. So I'm not trying to make some arbitrary judgment about who's got endurance and who hasn't. You can't do that from the outside, but I can say that endurance is one of the tools you have to deal with chronic discomfort and pain. And even if you have chronic pain, it's interesting because it's very much allied with depression, by the way. All of the research on chronic pain, back pain, for example, indicates, and chronic pain of all sorts, is that the more you allow your pain to render you inactive, the worse the outcome, including exacerbation of the pain. And depression is a pain disorder. And so that's very much worth thinking about too. It's like, move forward, move forward, move forward. And if you need to talk to somebody about what your plan is for the day or the hour or the week, then do that as well. And perhaps you also have to help get the people around you to help a bit. I need a little bit of help getting up in the morning. I need to have breakfast made for me, so that all I do when I get up in my terrible state of fog and confusion and terrible anxiety and depression is I have a shower, because that's what happens first. And then the next thing is I eat. And then that's better. At least you're out of bed and moving. And that's a start, you know? So, and then you endure and hope. And that's how it is. And you do the same thing when someone in your family is sick, or when you're facing a death, all of that. It's like one bloody foot in front of the other.
Treat yourself like you're someone that you care about. I read this piece of work by Jung a long while back, and it was a meditation on the injunction to treat your neighbor as you would like to be treated, something like that. And what Jung pointed out, which I really liked, was that wasn't an injunction to be nice to other people. It was an invitation to reciprocity. It was something like this. It's like, you should figure out how you would like to be treated, like you were taking care of yourself, not how you would like people to respond to you. It's more important than that. It's like, imagine you had a child that you really cared for, and someone said, well, people will treat this child exactly like you want them to, but you have to figure out what that is. And so then you'd have to sit down for like a month, and you'd think, okay, well, how do you want your child to be treated? You don't want everyone just to be nice to him, you know. You want people to challenge him, and you want people to discipline him, and you want people to tell him when he's wrong. It's like, you don't just want everyone to be nice. That's pathetic. It's pathetic. There's no challenge in that. And so, well, you want to treat other people like you would like to be treated. Well, then you have to figure out, how would you like to be treated? And while you'd like people to fawn all over you and just lay everything at your feet, it's like, no, that's not something you'd wish for someone that you were taking care of. And then there's an additional problem, which is, it's often the case that people will treat other people better than they treat themselves. That happens extremely frequently. So one of the things I pointed out in chapter 2 was that if you have a dog and you take him to a vet, and the vet gives you the prescription medicine, you'll go buy the medicine and you will give it to the dog, and you will do it properly. But if you go yourself to a doctor and you get a prescription, there's a 30% chance you won't even pick up the medication. And if you do, there's a 50% chance that you won't administer it to yourself properly. And so I really thought about that. When I first came across that statistic, it was another one of those little facts. I thought, what the hell's up with that? It's like, you'll do it for your dog, so obviously you'll do it for something you care about, and you're conscientious enough so you'll actually do it. So like, why wouldn't you do it for you? Your dog likes you, you know, even your dog would rather that you did, but you don't. And it's actually one of the reasons that modern medicine doesn't work nearly as well as it could, because people just don't take their medication. You make the world a much better place, much worse place, if you don't take care of yourself. So you should bloody well take care of yourself, you know, because, well, that's what the chapter's about. It's partly because you have something valuable to bring into the world. That's the thing about being an individual. It's the thing that Western civilization has always recognized, that as an individual, you have a light that you have to bring into the world, and that if you don't bring it into the world is a dimmer place. And that's a bad thing, because when the world is a dim place, it can get very, very, very dark. And so it's necessary, not just so that you feel better, not just so that you're a #1 lobster, none of those things. You need to take care of yourself, because you're in the best position to do that. And it's necessary for you to take care of yourself. Despite the fact that we're mortal and vulnerable and self-conscious and capable, not only capable of doing terrible things, but actually do them. Despite all that, you still have that responsibility.
The center of the world, which is a frightening proposition, and not one that's easily comprehensible. Solzhenitsyn's work in the Gulag Archipelago is particularly enlightening in this regard, because he insisted that it was a preconception of our Judeo-Christian heritage that each person was a center of the cosmos. And you can think of that as a center of consciousness, right? A center from which being itself is not only reflected, but also generated. And it was Solzhenitsyn's belief, and Dostoevsky's as well, and I think Jung would have been in accordance with this, and Nietzsche as well, for that matter, that in some manner that we don't fathom, because we don't understand the structure of the world very well, the outcome of the world is dependent on our choices, and equally on all of our choices. And I don't understand. I know that to be true, or feel that to be true. it's part of the doctrine that each person is of intrinsic and equal worth. Part of that doctrine is that each person has intrinsic and equal responsibility, and that we're each capable of generating a fair bit of hell around us and for other people, but also capable of generating a tremendous amount of good. And that the fate of the world as it careens through eternity is actually a consequence of the ethical decisions of each of us. It's a terrifying idea. It's no wonder that people flee from it into hedonism, let's say, and ideology, because it's very frightening possibility that the choices that you make day to day or fail to make have this profound and lasting effect on the structure of reality. But I don't really see any way out of that conclusion.
When I was a teenager, I mean, I did, God, if I had to write a book about the stupid things I did when I was a teenager, it'd be a very thick book. And it'd be a worse book if there were photographs accompanying it. And, you know, but I had this advantage that young people today don't have, which was, well, when my day of stupidity was over, I could go home and it was not there. You know, like it wasn't on Twitter, it wasn't on Facebook. There wasn't 20 of my friends communicating to me about, you know, what foolish thing I did at the party the night before. And young people now, they're just followed by paparazzi, essentially, constantly. And I've watched that with the young teenage daughters of many of my friends, because my kids were a little too old for that to actually have happened to them. But God, it's miserable. And we know that there is some relationship between the amount of time people use Facebook, for example, and their mental health, which means the more they use Facebook, the more depressed they are. And it might be that the depression is driving the Facebook use, but the causal pathway seems to be the other way around, which is, you know, it's just playing that unbelievably exposed social game. That's hard on people. And these aren't trivial technologies, you know. I mean, they're transforming the way we communicate with one another, and they're completely uncontrolled experiments. We have no idea what the medium or long-term consequences are going to be. And we'll never find out either, because, of course, the communication landscape changes so quickly that by the time you get adapted to one communication technology, another one has come along that's even more confusing that you now have to master. And so, well, that's why it's necessary for everyone to develop their own modicum of wisdom, I believe, because I don't know how else we're going to be able to deal with this technological transformation that's going to is already coming across us like a tidal wave. And, you know, you ain't seen nothing yet. The people in Silicon Valley have plans that, well, that make you think that the whole place should probably be bombed just for the safety of the rest of us, you know, because there's tremendous danger in that rapid acceleration of machine intelligence, and we have absolutely no idea where that's headed. So, and maybe it'll be great. It's possible that it'll be great, but power cuts both ways. So hopefully we can control it with our wisdom, and that's pretty much up to each of you to put your lives together so you can make good decisions. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And the reason I wrote that was because I had this client, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've spent 20 hours a week for 25 years listening to people tell me about their lives, you know, and those people were people who were just barely hanging on to the bottom of the world, up to people who were so successful you can hardly believe it, like the entire gamut of people. And that's been absolutely fascinating. It's like being a clinical psychologist, if you really listen, is like being immersed in a Dostoevsky novel all the time, you know, because it's amazing what people will tell you if you listen to them. People are so interesting if you actually listen to them, because they're so peculiar. Like they're like penguins or rhinoceroses or ostriches. They're unlikely creatures. And anyways, with regards to comparing yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today, this old client of mine, he was about 85 when he came to see me, and he was a financier and a kind of a mathematical genius. He made these little pendants out of a mathematical symbol for the most beautiful mathematical equation that was ever written. He made them out of gold, and he would hand those out. And he had studied psychology as a young man, and he introduced me to this concept that I didn't know about called the Pareto distribution, which, see, I'd been taught as a psychologist that most human characteristics were normally distributed, right? So most people were average and some people were extreme. That's a Pareto or a normal distribution. Intelligence is like that, and height, there's more people of average height than very tall or very short, and weight is like that, and lots of things are normally distributed, and psychologists tend to assume that everything is, but it isn't. Creative products are distributed in a Pareto distribution, and that's a whole different thing, and it's really important to know this. It's another fundamental fact, the knowledge of which can sort of transform the way you conceptualize, let's say, the political landscape. So here's an example of the Pareto distribution. You know, there's a rule of thumb that if you run a company that 20% of your employees do 80% of the work, or that 20% of your customers are responsible for 80% of your sales, or that 20% of them are responsible for 80% of the customer service calls. Same thing, but that's not exactly the rule. The rule is worse than that. The rule is, in a given domain, the square root of the number of people operating in that domain do half the productive work. So you think, well, you have 10 employees, 3 of them do half the work. It's like, yeah, okay. What if you have 100 employees? Then 10 of them do half the work. What if you have 1,000 employees? Well, then it's 30. And if it's 10,000 employees, then it's 100. And this actually turns out to be a rather ironclad rule. It applies across very, very many situations. It applies, for example, to the mass of stars and the size of cities. So you can see how universal it is as a law, and it's something like those that have more get more, and those that have less get less. That's the Matthew principle, right? To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken away. And the economists sometimes call that the Matthew principle. And so what that lays out is a world that's rife with inequality. So you know, you hear this idea that I think it's the 85 richest people in the world have more money than the bottom 2 billion. That's a Pareto distribution phenomena. And you might say, to hell with capitalism for producing that. It's like, sorry, you got your diagnosis wrong. It's a natural law. It's no matter what society you study, you get a Pareto distribution of wealth. You get a Pareto distribution of number of records recorded. You get a Pareto distribution of number of songs written or goals scored. Like any creative product has that characteristic. And it's partly because as you start to become successful, let's say, people offer you more and more opportunities. And as you start to fail, people move away from you and you plummet. And so, okay, so that's rough. So what it means is that there is always a landscape of inequality. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do anything about it, although I am saying that we don't know what to do about it. That's the thing, you know, because you can modify the Pareto distribution of wealth, let's say, but we don't know how to do it without maybe disrupting the system so completely that it collapses, which is what happened in the Soviet Union, for example, and in Maoist China. They were trying, at least in principle, to adjust inequality. But the cure was far worse than the disease. And the truth of the matter is we actually don't know technically how much inequality there has to be to generate wealth. We can guess, and you could say, well, there should be less, and you might say, well, there should be more. If you're left wing, you'd say less, and if you're right wing, you'd say, well, we'll just let the inequality flourish. But we do know that it's inevitable, and we also know that we don't know how to regulate it. So there is inequality. What that means is there's always going to be people around that are better at something than you are. And that's a problem, because you can get jealous and you can get bitter and you can get resentful, and worse, you can get hopeless, you know, because you look like I have this friend of mine. He told me something so funny. He was decrying his lack of success in the world, and he compared himself to his roommate, and he said, you know, his college roommate was doing much better than he was. And his bloody roommate was Elon Musk. It's like, really? Like, it's like, oh, you're not doing as well as Elon Musk. Well, I mean, you can see it would take it rather personally because they were roommates and everything. It wasn't like he was doing badly. Like, he was doing pretty damn well. It's like, I'm not as good as Elon Musk. It's like, yeah, well, you and like 7 billion other people, you know. But I thought it was instructive because Well, because you have to be careful who you compare yourself to. Now, you can't just not compare yourself to others, to successful people, right? Because then you don't have anything to aim at.
You know what I mean? If you're plagued by bouts of depression and anxiety, that does destabilize your identity. So it's almost by definition. But having said that, look, this is when habit and plan and strategy are so useful. So in the periods of depression that I've had, and some of them were long and certainly the most unpleasant experiences of my life. This is when you need a philosophy, let's say, that's allied with your vision and your strategy to sustain you. Because what would happen to me is that, I have a vision, and I suppose the vision is of a world that's better, that's less likely to descend into ideological catastrophe, and where people are more responsible and more awake and more educated and healthier. All of that, a vision of a better world, a world that's less hellish at least, but also a better world, and some sense of what role I might play in that. And so that's very motivating. Like, it's a profound goal to try to make things better. And you can do that locally. You can do that for yourself. You can do that for your family. You can do that for the broader community. And all of that's worth it, man. It's worth making some sacrifices for. It's worth suffering for to some degree. And then you decompose that into the day-to-day and week-to-week strategies and actions that you're undertaking, the plans and the activities that you're putting forward to make that dream a reality, to realize it. And then when the depression and anxiety come along, you think, part of it with depression, it's just bloody endurance. It's like you get up and you work through the next hour. You try to stay on track. You try to implement your strategic plans to the best of your ability. And you hope and you pray that you'll get through it. You'll get through it, and that the darkness will recede. And you stay on track. You eat even though you're not hungry. You get up even though you want to stay in bed. You interact with people even though you'd rather be alone. And it's the benefit of disciplined habits can sustain you. It's like the boat you're rowing in through a terrible storm, leaks and all, and maybe you'll be overwhelmed, but you have the boat and you can row forward, and that's what you've got. And so endurance is a huge part of it. And then I would say with its anxiety, it's the same thing. It's like, or very much the same, as you're terrified and uncertain, but you move ahead to the best of your ability. And again, you operate at least to some degree on hope. And if you haven't got hope, then you've got blind, bloody endurance. And that's all motivated by some sense that you're working towards something that's worthwhile working toward, and that is, well, that's your own long-term well-being, to treat yourself properly. It's the stability and productivity and harmony and health of your family. That's a huge deal. And then it's whatever benefit you can be to the community. And if you have to limp along and drag yourself forward in order to maintain that pathway, then so be it. Because it's better than the alternative. It's hard to say what the soul means metaphysically, because say beyond the confines of a single human being, we do have this sense that the soul can expand itself into something that's greater than it has been. It has this capacity for growth. And we do have this sense that the soul can expand itself to the point where it's enlightened, for lack of a better word, that it's working as efficiently as possible to transform everything that's unnecessarily painful and malevolent about the world into what's positive and good. And that it does that as a consequence of confronting the world with courage and truth. And I think that's right. And I do think that means that the soul participates in something eternal, which is the attempt of being itself to transform what's unnecessarily painful and malevolent into what's good, and that human beings actually do participate in that, and that's part of the reason that our ancient tradition insists that we're made in the image of God. And I think that it's a mistake to underestimate the importance of that, because I don't think that you can live a life of sufficient profundity to protect yourself from being corrupted by suffering and malevolence without adopting a responsibility that's commensurate with that set of ideas. I think that you either orient yourself upward, to the star above the horizon, and try desperately to improve the structure of being, or you work at counter purposes to it and make things worse. I don't think there's a middle ground. In fact, to the degree there is a middle ground, it tilts towards the negative, because people who try to occupy the middle ground generally try to accrue the benefit, let's say, without adopting any of the risk. And that's not acceptable, not helpful.
I think that the best approach to ameliorating inequality is to strengthen the individual. I mean, and that's what I've concentrated on doing. Like, we have this program, the self-authoring suite, and there's a component of that helps people write an autobiography, and another component that helps them write an analysis of their personality, and another component that helps them write out a plan for the future. And we've used that. We've studied the effect of having people write out a detailed plan for their future. And it's a proper plan. It's like, okay, look, you get to have what you want 3 to 5 years down the road. You get to have the friends you want. You get to have the family you want. You get to have the career you want, the education. You get to take care of yourself properly. You get to withstand the temptations of drug and alcohol abuse and other sorts of impulsive pleasures. You get to make productive and meaningful use of your time. Okay, what does that look like for you? Write it out. What does it look like? You need a vision. And then you need another vision of how terrible things could be if you let all your bad habits get the upper hand. And we've had people do that in an experimental situation. And mostly they were college students. And the consequences of that, there were 2 consequences. One was general, which was that university students were about 30% more likely to stay in university and got grades that were about 25% better, which is a walloping effect. But even more interestingly, and this is the coolest thing I think that we ever discovered as in our psychological research, we did this research in Holland at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, at the Rotterdam School of Management, and we ran business students through the Future Authoring program for multiple years, so several thousands of them. And we stratified them by gender and ethnicity. A pretty rough cut. Men, women, and then Dutch nationals and non-Western ethnic minorities. Okay, and so the performance was like this. The Dutch women were at the top, then the Dutch men, then the non-Western ethnic minority women, then the non-Western ethnic minority men. And they were behind the Dutch women they showed about an 80% decrement in performance. Really quite catastrophic. 2 years after they did the Future Authoring program, they were ahead of the Dutch women. It just blew us away, because it was a perfect indication of the fact that you can use a psychological intervention to ameliorate what looks like a sociological problem.
If you're hungry and you eat, well, that's good, but it's over, and then you're on to the next thing, right? It's not exactly sustaining, it's just necessary. That's called consummatory reward, by the way. This other reward system is incentive reward. And the incentive reward system works on dopamine, this neurochemical dopamine, which is also the neurochemical tracks that opiates and cocaine and amphetamines, the drugs that people really like to abuse, alcohol often for some people, activate. And so you might say if you don't have enough meaning in your life, then you're more prone to addiction. And that's definitely the case, even with rats. If you take a rat and you put him in a cage by himself and he has nothing to do, and then you give him access to cocaine, he'll get addicted to the point where he won't do anything but take cocaine. But if you throw the rat back in with a bunch of other rats and he gets to do rat things, then it's very hard to get him addicted to cocaine. And so the purposeless rat is prone to addiction. Well, it's the same with human beings. Now, here's a corollary to that, which is really cool. So the magnitude of the reward you experience as you're moving towards a goal is proportionate to the importance of the goal. So that means the more important the goal you pick, the more possibility there is for the kind of reward, let's say, it's really a state of being that is life-affirming, and it is directly life-affirming in that, you know, like if you're in a football game and it's an important football game and maybe you break a finger, and you know, normally that's a problem. It hurts, and you're going to stop doing whatever you're doing. But if you're right in the middle of the game, then you'll be so amped up on this reward system that it's analgesic. It stops the pain. It also suppresses anxiety. So if you have a purpose, then it's analgesic. It takes some of the pain out of life. It's very positive in that it motivates and energizes you and focuses you and makes you able to remember and pay attention. And it quells fear. And so those things are all direct. And so then you might think, well, what's the best possible goal? Well, and that's the purpose, I would say, of religious training and philosophical training. It's like, just what the hell are you doing in the world?
The more radical the necessary change, the more pain that accompanies it. Like the more opportunity as well. And a lot of what we learn painfully. And so it's not surprising that people shrink away from learning. We learn in pain and anxiety very frequently. Everyone knows that. Like the things that you really learned in life, it's like, it was no joy, man. Like it took you out. And so the fact that people flee from that is hardly surprising. But it doesn't help, that's the thing. It just stores up the catastrophe for later. And so the better idea is to eat a little poison every day so that you don't have to overdose in a month. It's something like that. And it is the case that I think because you aren't forced to, first of all, you don't learn unless you're forced to learn. I know there's alternatives to that. There's the voluntary search for knowledge, and that's a fine thing, and that is an antidote to this. But apart from that, speaking more practically, you tend not to learn unless you're forced to learn, and what you tend to learn by force are difficult lessons. And so people are very prone to not seek that out. It's not surprising, but it's because they don't understand the consequences very well. You know, it's because they're convinced that there's some way of forestalling the necessary learning, and there isn't any way of forestalling it. All you do is make it worse in the future. You make yourself smaller, and you make the lesson harder. And so that's why in so many religious doctrines there's emphasis on humility. You know, and humility isn't to debase yourself. It's to understand that you don't know enough so that your life isn't going to be miserable. And so every chance you get to grab something new that will help you along your way, you should take it as fast as you can. But you have to have a very tragic, I would say, view of reality, and also a harsh one, because it's not just tragedy, it's also malevolence. You have to understand that those are waiting for you, and that makes you desperate enough to learn, and that might make you desperate enough to fall out of your ideology. But that's a hard way of looking at the world. It beats living through it, though.
If you want another amazing Jordan Peterson espresso, check it out right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
The first thing I think you need to understand is that these people that you're comparing yourself to, you don't really know very well.